Okay, why don't we get started?
Good.
And we'll let people join as they do. Again, check to make sure you're on mute. This is Jean Anderson from the Continuing Education Committee. Welcome, everyone. Everyone tonight is a Master Gardener, but we'll review some of the principles of the College of the Environment and Life Sciences Cooperative Extension, of which we are a part. This is called Learn at Home, a webinar series. Our guiding principles, as you know, are committing to improving quality of life, livelihoods, and health of our natural environment through our work. We believe in social justice, environmental justice, and we strive to deepen our cultural understanding and proficiency while building capacity to create inclusive experiences that address diverse stakeholder needs. Our strategic areas of focus are land stewardship, food systems and agriculture, water resources, energy efficiency, conservation and renewables, and healthy lifestyles. A little housekeeping. Before we get started, please put any questions that you have in chat, and we will have time at the end for questions to be answered. The session is being recorded. Please visit the Cooperative Extension YouTube channel to access the recording, and that all information will also be for Master Gardeners in the dirt at the bottom of the page. The recorded webinars are also closed caption for hearing impaired, and Dr. Bailey, as you can see, is using that capacity tonight.
Awesome. All right. Oops. Let's get going. Hey, thank you for that introduction. And sorry for the background noise. If you have yourself off of mute, please think about muting yourself. But that's okay. I'm used to dealing with rowdy audiences. I teach at Providence College, as you can see, and so thrilled to see all of you here tonight on a busy day for everyone. But what I'm talking about, I'm hoping will appeal to a lot of you. And that's talking about why plants should make medicines for humans. And we're going to find out that that's because of their ecological uses within the plants. And so the title of the talk is The Ecological Origin of Plant Medicines. And the picture I chose here is actually a garden that I was able to visit when I lived in Montpellier, France for a while. And it is one of the oldest medicinal gardens in Europe. And so we can think about kind of the actual historical use of medicinal plants. And within the European tradition, a lot of that history starts with these botanical gardens that started with the idea of having medicinal plants growing all together near schools of medicine. And in fact, this garden dates from the 16th century. So some kind of outline of what I'm going to talk about so that everybody has a roadmap of where we're going. And if you've got questions that you have, maybe you'll see where they're going to come up. And if you have questions that I don't answer during the talk, do feel free to put them in the chat, and we will leave time to cover questions at the end. So I'm just going to start off about talking about why we should be interested in plant medicines, what's their importance in our culture and society today. We're going to talk about how plants kind of make a lot of different chemicals, and those chemicals can be divided into kind of two big buckets. One is a bucket that is all the chemicals that every plant makes pretty much. So part of their common toolbox of chemicals that pretty much every plant knows how to make. And then there are these species-specific chemicals that only certain plants make and others do not. And we're going to understand why that is. We're going to talk about how they evolve new chemicals in their special species-specific kind of bucket, usually starting with components that are in the bucket that is the chemicals that every plant makes. And then we're going to talk about how variable these important compounds that are species specific that we use for medicines are, and how plants don't always make a lot of them unless they're needed. And so what we get is a huge amount of variation, not only among different species because of their different ecological interactions, but also among years, among leaves, among harvests, and that we're going to see how that affects how we think about using plant medicine safely. So that's a big picture of what we're going to be talking about as we go forward. I always like to have a moment with my students, as well as when I'm doing public teaching, to emphasize what kind of credentials I have for doing this kind of work. My background is in general biology and evolutionary biology, and my research has always focused on plants and, in fact, plant mating systems. So I have my Bachelor of Arts from the University of Chicago, and I have a PhD in ecology, evolution and behavior from Indiana University, and I've been a faculty member at Providence College for about 15 years now. And this is a picture of me with some of my students in one of our wonderful rain gardens on campus. So why am I interested in plant medicines? Obviously, my background is not plant medicines. I'm not a medical person, but the reason why I've become more and more interested in this is because a lot of people don't understand how evolution and ecology are part of this story, but also because plant medicines in general are just becoming way more popular in our society. And in fact, Fortune Business, for example, says that plant medicines are being valued at about 150 billion in the last year. So this is a large marketplace. A lot of people are buying these medicines here in the United States. And if we look kind of percentage-wise at all the people in the US, about 42% are using some sort of plant medicine on a regular basis. Of those, less than 1/3 consider them real drugs and use the safety measures, for example, telling their doctors about what drugs they're taking. And this can be really problematic because we're going to find out that plant medicines can have just as many side effects and drug interactions as traditional medicines do. Some people believe that all plant medicines are uniformly safe because they believe that they were evolved for our use. And we're going to see that plants are actually evolving these chemicals for their own use, not with an idea of humans necessarily using them, and that these chemicals can still have some of the problematic side effects and interactions that traditional medicines have. So it was important to me, as somebody who is concerned about how people are using plant medicines and wanting them to use them safely, that I started developing some tools that I will present to you here, but also have used at the Roger Williams Park Botanical Center. So we're going to focus in on plant medicines. Some people call these herbal medicines or have other kinds of terms that they use, but we're going to ask why plants are making something that is good for us. In medieval society, when the Jardin des Plantes in Montpellier was being put together, a lot of people believed in the doctrine of signatures, meaning that the creator actually would put signs in different plants that indicate their use. Hence, things like toothwort, where the flower looks a little bit like a tooth, people thought that you could use that for toothaches and things like that. And so that there was some sort of symbolism that was there in the plant. Other traditional medicines have been developed through trial and error. But the question still remains, why does that plant have that chemical in there to begin with? Where did it come from? How did it evolve, right? And how can we use them safely? Well, even though plants don't come with an ingredient list like the prepared foods that we get from the store, it is possible to put together a list of the things that are inside of our plants as if we are buying them in that way. And this is a cute little plant label that someone who's actually in Australia put together. They have some of their common ingredients actually listed by E numbers. So you'll see some things in there that don't look right from an American perspective. But you can still get the idea that there's ingredients in my blueberries here. Top ingredient is water. The next one, fructose, right? So you have sugars, you have amino acids, you have fatty acids, and these are different things that are needed for all of life. All of cells have to have certain sugars and proteins and fatty acids in them in order to function properly. And so all plants make some of these chemicals. There's also chemicals that all of the lineage of Plantae have because they need to have certain pigments, that chlorophyll A and B, in order to capture sunlight as part of photosynthesis. So we have colors that are common to all kinds of plants. We have nucleic acids like DNA and RNA that's common to all kinds of plants. So there's this toolbox of different chemicals that make up cells that all plants have. And then we're going to find out that there's some special chemicals, like perhaps some of the chemicals that give these blueberries the beautiful colors that they have and the flavors that they have that are specific to that species. We're going to find out that these species-specific chemicals are usually things like flavors, scents, colors, and drugs, and that they're using these for different ecological purposes. For example, we have our lemon and our mint here on the screen that are both making flavors and scents that are there to protect them from microbials like bacteria and fungi, but also to deter herbivores. In our beautiful Rudbeckia there's not only the beautiful deep yellow color of the petals, but there's also UV pigments there that humans can't see. They give a bullseye effect for pollinators to show them where they can show up to get a great pollen reward, as well as what the plant needs them to do, which is carry away some pollen. And then the last picture there, if you're not familiar with it, is tobacco. And tobacco not only makes all sorts of different petals and colors and all sorts of attractants for its pollinators, but it also makes nicotine, not only in its nectar, but also in its leaves to deter different herbivores that might be coming by. And so you can see that there's all these parts that are species specific that are doing all of these interesting manipulative things, especially to animals, which might be having interactions with those plants in nature. So when I think of ecology, I often think of species interactions, right? And these plants are making these scents, flavors, colors, and drugs to interact with insects who might be pollinators or might be herbivores. It's to deter things like yeasts and fungal pathogens or bacterial pathogens, or it might be to keep that deer from taking more than one bite of that mint plant and to get it to move on. Here's some other examples of all those different kinds of things, so we can start getting our imagination going about how plants are using chemicals to manipulate other species. So for example, we started off with wild roses and we have selected on them to increase their colors and scents to make them even more beautiful to us. But those colors and scents already existed in the ancestral roses, and we have merely selected them for higher expression patterns to get the beautiful roses that we have in our garden. And those colors and scents are chemicals that are there in the plant. And so some of those particular chemicals that are involved in giving the beautiful red color to red roses and some of that rich smell, that rose smell that we get from roses are listed here on this poster. And these are to lure those pollinators in. I often talk to my students about different pollinator syndromes, meaning what are the kinds of different ways that plants are trying to pull in pollinators and alert them from across a meadow. Hey, I'm over here and I'd really like you to come visit. I often think of flowers as being almost like the fast food logos of different plants, right? You want to be memorable and you want to be seen from a distance. And so these roses not only have a great color for visual pollinators to move around, but also scents to attract in things like moths that are more finding their different food sources using scent. We also have problematic insects or insects that do more than one thing. Here, for example, we have a milkweed plant with one of the few herbivores that are able to eat milkweed. Milkweed contains not only latex, different compounds that are bitter, but also cardiac glycosides, which, as you might notice from the word cardiac in there, have bad effects on different nervous systems. And so most animals will take a bite of milkweed, get bitterness, also feel a little funny, and not eat that plant anymore. The monarch has evolved to be able to not digest those cardiac glycosides, but actually to concentrate them in special areas of their body, which means that when birds try to eat those monarchs, they get those cardiac glycosides that have been saved up from their food and helps protect those monarchs from being eaten by their own predators. But the original use of that milkweed cardiac glycoside was to try to keep other herbivores from eating it, whereas the monarch might see that milkweed as being providing them a plant medicine, right, that helps protect them from other creatures. We often think about plants and animals, right? Plants can't move, and so they're often manipulating animals to either go away and leave them alone or to show up and take away pollen grains so that mating can occur. But plants also have interactions with other plants, and allelopathic chemicals are plants that plants use in interplant warfare. So this yerba mate plant here is actually producing special chemicals that not only drip off of its leaves, but are exuded from its roots to help keep other seedling plants from coming up in its area of soil, and so that it has extra access to soil nutrients and water. And so allelopathy is another reason why plants might make specialized chemicals for ecological interactions. They might use special chemicals to help deter other plants from coming up in their area. So where do these chemicals come from? Plants need these because they can't move. In order to interact with other species, they usually have to have some sort of chemical way, better living through chemistry, right, to manipulate those other organisms in their environment. Where they're evolving these chemicals from, though, is in that common pool or that bucket that we talked about that all plants make. And so using those different components, those sugars and proteins and fatty acids, right? They can add on components, they can mix and match different components to make new chemicals. And then evolution will sort through those new chemicals that might be made through mutation and encourage the ones that actually manipulate different species in their environment to do better. However, we're going to find out that because of this common toolbox, sometimes multiple species make similar chemicals. And sometimes there's a plant only has so many components and has to choose which kinds of products to make with the components that they have, such that there's sometimes trade-offs between different possible uses for the same components. Let's give some examples that are from the kind of European traditional herbal toolbox. Thinking of a different kind of toolbox, our herbal toolbox here. Let's talk about coriander, which is a pretty common component of medieval herbal gardens and something that's still used today for many different purposes. For example, different digestive issues. It can be used as an anticonvulsant, and there's some information about that. But then it's also used as an antimicrobial, so against both bacteria and yeast fungi, as a way to kind of kill them off on surfaces, including on human skin. So if we take a coriander plant and either crush up its leaves or its seeds, we get a whole different list of chemicals that come out of that. And I've listed some of the major ones here on a little insert. And you can see that there's all sorts of different chemically sounding kinds of things. One of the ones that I want you to notice is linalool. And that's actually, you'll see in the composition percentage, one of the major ingredients of the essential oil that you get out of grinding up coriander. And linalool is something that we're going to find out is made by a lot of different species, but also has a lot of different possible good things that is doing for the plant. However, if I take coriander or coriander essential oil, I'm also getting all of these other things in smaller doses, which might work together to add to the medicinal effect of what I'm taking. So linalool is something that if I had to give to you, and I've actually bought linalool, it has a beautiful scent. It's something that you would definitely recognize as being a botanical kind of scent and something that you recognize. And in fact, over 200 species are known to make linalool. For example, many of the mints make linalool, including lavender, basil, and thyme. Some of our cannabaceae, which includes both hops, like that you would use to flavor beer, and cannabis. And the asters, goldenrod and mugwort, also often contain linalool. I have a nice little picture here from a great resource for learning your different plant families. This is from Botany in a Day and shows some of the different common characteristics of our mint family. So why is it making linalool, and what does linalool do? I just told you that the reason why plants make specialized chemicals is for ecological purposes. Well, we find out that linalool can both attract pollinators in, because it is a very lovely scent. It is a scent that it's associated with many different kind of flowering plants. And in fact, many of our hawk moths, the Sphingidae, which is I have a picture of here, use that scent to help find flowers at night, because these moths are foraging at night. So you can't see pretty colors of your petals, but you can scent different flowers. And so they'll use that linalool scent and some of the other secondary chemicals to have kind of a signature smell of a different flower and be able to know what flower is blooming right now, and gives them a reward of nectar to help fill their bellies and keep them flying. So you can see the long tongue on this hawk moth poking down into, I believe that's another tobacco plant here. And so it's using those scents to figure out where it should go. And the plant is rewarding that moth with nectar and getting pollinated in return. We also find out, however, that hawk moths also lay their eggs on some of the same plants that they pollinate. And those eggs, when they hatch, will eat the host plant. So here we have an ecological interaction between a plant and a moth, in which the moth is both being good for the plant, being its pollinator, but also bad for the plant in that it can lay its eggs, which will then grow and eat the plant at a later date. Because there's this balance of good and bad in that relationship, the plants will use various chemicals to also deter those hawk moths and make them go away, make their flowers smell nice and their leaves smell bad. And in fact, they can use linalool for both of these things, but they use slightly different versions of linalool. I showed you here a picture, and they probably look exactly the same, but what you'll notice in the very top, the little piece that leads out to the O and the H either is a dotted line or a filled in line. And that indicates whether or not that is pointing outwards towards you or backwards away. And so you can see that these things are actually mirror images of each other, where the OH is coming out at you in one and away from you in the other. So much like our right and left hands, these are not equivalent to each other, right, but are mirror images of each other. And in fact, one linalool is an attractant and the other linalool is a deterrent that helps push those animals away. And there's a great article from the Chicago Botanic Garden that has a little bit more on that relationship of hawk moths and plants. Okay, so that's awesome. Plants are using linalool to get insects to do what they want, but why should I use linalool? Is there any good thing for me? Well, we find out that linalool is also an antimicrobial. And you can see that in this picture here. If you look up in the top, you'll see what looks like a petri dish, and that's indeed what it is. And you'll see kind of a whitish covering on that petri dish. That whitish covering is a lawn of bacteria, just like a lawn of grass. And you'll notice that there's these little paper discs sitting on there. Those paper discs have been soaked in different essential oils. One was in lemon balm, one was in coriander, and one was in grapeseed oil. And you'll see that there's a little halo of no bacterial growth around both the lemon balm and the coriander. This is the kind of experiment that we do when we're asking whether or not a chemical has an antimicrobial effect. And you can see that indeed, coriander essential oil kills off bacteria and prevents it from growing. So we can use coriander oil to prevent bacteria from growing on our skin. We could maybe take a little coriander oil if we have some stomach upset, or we could use it around our house for cleaning or things like that. And so you can see that the halo diameter is what is in those bar graphs there. In the top bar graph, it's being compared to actual antibiotics that you would be given by a traditional doctor. And in the bottom, it's being compared to other essential oils. And you can see that the antimicrobial effect of coriander is comparable to some of the other kinds of antibiotics that we might get from our doctors. Because plants make all sorts of different chemicals, and they are limited in the kinds of nutrients they have to make those components, we have a lot of variation among species, among varieties, and among different life history individuals in how much of these chemicals they make. Such that if I had a coriander plant and a related parsley plant, they're going to have different levels of linalool because they're different species, right? If I have a coriander that's been grown primarily for eating its leaves fresh versus a variety that was grown mainly for its seeds, they might have different levels of linalool as well, right? And if I have a coriander plant that I grew in my shady backyard versus my sunny front yard, right, I also might get different levels of linalool. Or if I have a plant that I forgot to water one week, I might get different levels of linalool. So you can see that part of the problem is that the ingredient that we're really using for its medicinal effect is highly variable among different species, families, and individuals. Why all the variation? Well, as I mentioned before, plants are limited by the number of components that they have and may have to choose which thing they're going to use those components for. This is a great example from a friend of mine who was in grad school with me. He actually was looking at Claytonia virginica, or spring beauty, which you may recognize. Spring beauty is highly variable for the color of its flowers. And in fact, we find out that white pigmented flowers survive best because they are using some of the chemicals in their body to make antimicrobials that keep it from getting a rust disease, a fungal disease, right? We find other individuals who have pink flowers who have much better pollination visitation because they're much more visible, especially among all of the spring flowers where there's a lot of white spring flowers. And so these pink ones really show up well. They really attract the pollinators in, and they really can set seeds very well. However, a lot of the pink flowered individuals end up dying from rust disease. So you see that there's these different strategies here. A plant can use those flavonols either to make pink pigment and get high pollination, or they can use those flavonols to fight off fungal disease and have good survivorship. So you can live fast and die young and have lots of babies, or you can live a few years and only have a few babies every year, but survive being attacked by fungal rust. So you see there's this trade-off. I only have so many flavonols in my body because of the level of energy and nutrients that I have, and I can either choose to be pink and pretty, or I can be white and healthy. So as we can see from Claytonia virginica, we get different lineages that are kind of selected in different ways. Unfortunately, as gardeners, how we treat our plants also affects how much of these metabolites or secondary chemicals, the chemicals that we use for medicine, are present in these different plants. And I pulled this up because I thought that this would be impactful for a lot of you. There's been a lot of great studies that say that stressed tomato plants make tastier tomatoes. Those flavor chemicals can be enhanced by actually having a hard life history. And we can see that we can kind of make sense of that in some ways, in that a plant that has less water, right, is going to concentrate its flavors more because there's just less water in those fruits. But also, sometimes if a plant is being attacked by an herbivore, it's going to make more of the things to fight off that herbivore, which may be the flavors or medicinal parts that we really enjoy. Okay. And so these different life histories, these different things that happen during the life of this plant can affect how much tastes, scents, flavors, and different kinds of medicinal qualities that this plant may have. I wanted to give you one more example to also kind of drive home how plant medicines can also be problematic in some ways. And so I wanted to give you the example here, another one from the common European pharmacopoeia of plants, St. John's wort, or perforated St. John's wort in particular, Hypericum perforatum. Many of you have probably heard of this. It's a very commonly suggested plant for individuals who have depression nowadays. In the past, in medieval gardens, they grew St. John's wort, but use it for all sorts of different things, including kind of kidney and lung disorders. We find that there are a lot of interesting components to St. John's wort, and researchers have been looking at a couple different chemicals that this plant makes. Hypericin is one that they've done a lot of research on, and it's one that seems to have effects on neurotransmitters, which if you know anyone who takes medication for chronic depression, you know that the kinds of medicines that we give nowadays are ones that affect levels of neurotransmitters in their brains. And so it seems to be that there is a pathway that we can understand how St. John's wort might act as an antidepressant. However, there's a big caution that you should also use when thinking about St. John's wort. And that is that it can negatively interact with a lot of conventional medicines, not only other antidepressants, which may have similar pathways, and so taking both may have the effect of doubling your dosage, right? But it can also decrease the effectiveness of a lot of other common conventional medicines. Also, it can have severe side effects, so that you can end up feeling bad in other ways, even though it may be helping out your neurotransmitter levels, okay? So as we can see here, St. John's wort is making these chemicals not for our good, but to help further itself. It uses hypericin and other things to help protect itself, to and manipulate the different other species to species interactions it's involved in. Because of that, we have to ask ourselves, how much am I getting? Am I getting the right thing? And am I having side effects? And do I need to worry about how it's going to interact with other drugs that I'm taking? So to kind of sum up all of these different ideas that we've been talking about. One, plant medicines are awesome. They're fascinating, and they're really great for many people. They can treat a lot of conditions that maybe conventional medicines we don't have yet, or that aren't very effective. You can grow your own medicine in your own yard, which I think is appealing to a lot of people, right? It gives you control over your access to your medicines. Because there's an emphasis on whole plants, it means that you're getting a mixture of different chemicals that may work together in synergistic ways to make your medicine work better. It also draws on deep cultural knowledge, whether you're drawing from the European pharmacopoeia, Native American, maybe some of our Latin American different pharmacopoeias, or from African or Asian pharmacopoeias, right? These draw on different long-term kind of traditional ecological knowledges of different populations. And so maybe adding a lot of great information that we haven't captured in the kind of science tradition that we have today. Unfortunately, there are also reasons to have caution about using plant medicines. Because you're using whole plants or essential oils, which are mixtures of a lot of different chemicals, that complex chemical composition can make it really difficult to know what's the active ingredient or ingredients and whether or not you're getting the dosage correct. Chemical content will vary among all the different years and harvests that you have. There are some different brands here in the US, and especially all the brands that I know of in Germany because of different rules there, that will actually tell you what dosage you're getting. And so they'll actually take a sample from all of their different harvests and make sure that you're getting the exact right dose. There is no label for side effects. You need to do your own research to know whether or not this is going to cause nausea or dizziness or whatever your side effect is, right? So if you're going to use plant medicines, do your background check and know what kind of side effects that you might expect. Lastly, a lot of different herbals and things like that will suggest that you should try a small amount of whatever that plant is in your mouth or on your hands. And then from that, figure out what the effect of having a big dose of that plant will do. Unfortunately, the sensory effect of something in your mouth may not reflect what it's going to do farther down in your digestive system, right? There are many things like a green apple that will dry out your mouth. It's not going to dry out your bowels. Actually, it's going to loosen your bowels. It's going to give you diarrhea. If you've ever eaten green apples, it's not good. It's not fun, right? And so realizing that it's hard for you to understand or predict ahead of time the effect that a different chemical will have in your body. So what should we do? What's the take-home messages? Well, plants use chemistry to protect and heal themselves. Humans can exploit these different chemicals that plants make to be medicines for us, but the chemicals present and the concentrations vary widely. So I hope those are things that each of you now understand about plant medicines and that I did my job well. Take-home message as far as if you want to take plant medicines in the future, what do you need to take them safely? Make sure you've got the right species. Make sure you've got the right dose. Look out for side effects and tell your doctor, these are medicines that may be interacting with other medicines that you have, and your doctor needs to know. And many doctors are becoming much better about understanding why people are taking plant medicines and knowing about the certain side effects that they might expect. Thank you so much for listening. And one of the reasons why I'm really excited to talk to the URI Master Gardeners is that I hope that some of you will turn around and teach others. And so what I'm hoping that will come out of tonight is that you will start talking about plant medicines with people in your life, teach them about the benefits and the risks of plant medicines. I hope that when you talk about it, you help people understand why there are both goods and bads of plant medicines by talking about plant ecology so that they can connect up why plants make plant medicines and why they're not always good for us. And I hope that if in the future, if any of you are interested in teaching this in different demonstration gardens or with school groups, that maybe you could join us again, maybe later next year in the spring, and we can talk about some of the activities that I've developed for kids to make their own herbal teas or scratch and sniff stickers using essential oils, and start being able to have experiential learning as part of this process. Lastly, I would love for us to have some great community expertise trading where we can get different people with different herbal traditions to talk to each other about some of the great plants that are there in their cultures and that we could start growing here in Rhode Island and research. And that, I will turn it back over to Jean.
Hi, everyone. Thanks so much, Dr. Bailey. And we have a couple of questions already. Roger asks, can you comment on cannabis, please?
Cannabis is a really interesting plant that makes a lot of different chemicals to it, right? When I was a kid, people only talked about THC, and now we're talking about CBD, right? So there's a lot of different things in there. It's in the hop family. And as we know from drinking beers, right, hops have a huge range of different flavors that they make. Very similar for cannabis. There's a lot in that toolbox, right? And different lineages are pulling different parts of that pharmacopoeia out. That's about all I know about cannabis, but a good question.
And Jan asks, let me just go back up here. Can we in the US get the dosage info that European countries have available? If so, how do we get it?
So there are a lot of different herbal medicine companies out there. Some of them will do this and some of them will not. So you need to be a good consumer and check their sites. Really good sites, if you scroll down for the ingredient, they're going to tell you the scientific name of the plant. They're going to tell you, if this is leaves or seeds or what you have, and they will give you what the dosage is of their, essential oils.
And Linda asks, 42% of Americans use herbal remedies. How does that compare to other countries' usage?
I don't know off the top of my head. They are very popular in Germany, as is perhaps not surprising considering that they have laws about the purity and standardization of their herbal medicines. But I couldn't tell you off the top of my head what percentage of people use it. Part of it has to do with changing rules about whether or not national health insurance or private health insurance here in the US covers these things. And there has been a big change in the number of different insurers who will cover herbal medicines in the recent years. So,
and any other questions? Gives a minute to Tracy asks, how does the potency of homemade crushed oregano with olive oil get stronger over time?
Oh, it might continue to extract. I am not a big expert in all of the things that are in oregano, but I can tell you from taking a lot of chemistry classes that those fats will continue to break up more cells and release more chemicals over time. And so that might be why it's becoming stronger. You've just got more time for that interaction to work chemically.
Great. And I think that's it. I just want to remind everyone also that the intake for the next Master Gardener class for 2023 is closed, but the believe it or not, 2024 class, you'll see more about it starting in June, advertising for it, and it will close on November 1st of 2023. Also, if you have further questions or suggestions or comments, the Continuing Ed Committee has developed a survey tool on Google, and you all will receive it. And we ask that you just take a few minutes to answer it and give some feedback to Dr. Bailey and to the committee as well. So thank you all. Thanks again, Dr. Bailey.
Thank you for having me. Thank you, everyone, for showing up on an evening.